There is a particular kind of man that each era decides it needs. Not the man who actually exists in greatest numbers, the careful man, the cautious man, the man who calculates his risks and manages his image and never quite commits to anything that might cost him more than he is prepared to pay. The man the era decides it needs is different. He is the man who seems incapable of calculation, who wears his appetites openly, who makes the women in the audience believe they are being seen, and the men believe they are being understood. He is, in short, a fantasy, but a fantasy built from something real, and the something real is what makes it work. Clark Gable was that man for the 1930s and 1940s, and the something real underneath the ears and the grin and the charm that the publicity department amplified into mythology was a toughness that had been earned rather than performed, the toughness of a man who had grown up with nothing and had clawed his way to the top of the most glamorous industry in the world without ever quite believing he belonged there. William Clark Gable was born on February 1st, 1901, in Cadiz, Ohio, the son of an oil well driller who moved the family constantly following the work. His mother died when he was 7 months old. His father remarried, and his stepmother gave him what warmth his childhood contained. But the childhood was fundamentally shaped by physical labor, by poverty, by the specific knowledge that comfort was not guaranteed, and that the world did not owe you anything you were not willing to take. He drifted toward acting in his early 20s, through theater troupes in Oregon, through the Los Angeles stage scene, through years of small parts and near misses, and the grinding work of someone who has decided on a destination and is willing to take the long road to get there. He was not, in the conventional sense, immediately obvious as a star. The ears were too large. The face was rugged in ways that the silence had not required, and that the early talkies were still figuring out how to use. But there was something in the voice, in the body, in the specific quality of a man who was comfortable in his own skin because he had never had the luxury of being anything else, and the camera eventually found it. MGM signed him in 1931, and the studio system that had swallowed so many people whole gave Gable exactly what he needed: scale, roles. The machinery of stardom pointed in his direction and operated with the efficiency of an industry that knew, when it had something valuable, how to make the most of it. By 1934, he was the top box office draw in Hollywood. By 1938, a poll of American moviegoers had declared him the King of Hollywood, a title that was meant as a compliment and that he carried with the wry awareness of a man who knew how quickly kingdoms changed hands. It Happened One Night in 1934 gave him the Oscar and gave the undershirt industry a genuine crisis. He removed his shirt in a scene to reveal a bare chest, and sales of undershirts dropped measurably across America because men wanted to imitate what they had seen. Gone with the Wind in 1939 gave him Rhett Butler, the role that fit so perfectly that for many people it stopped being a role and became simply Gable himself. The two identities merged into something the audience could not separate and did not want to. Carole Lombard arrived in his life in 1936, and what happened between them was the realest thing in a life that contained a great deal that was performed. She was funny, genuinely, riotously, unexpectedly funny, with a comedian's timing and a complete absence of vanity about it, which was unusual in Hollywood, and which Gable found after years of careful, beautiful women who managed their images with exhausting precision, like opening a window. She was also direct in the way that direct people are direct, not as a performance of honesty, but as a simple absence of the mechanisms that other people use to soften what they mean.
They married in 1939 on a ranch in the San Fernando Valley that Gable had bought, and that became, in the years they had together, the closest thing to the ordinary life he had spent his adulthood missing. She raised chickens, he went hunting. They built something that the studio system, which preferred its stars to be in permanent performance mode, found inconvenient, and that both of them found more valuable than anything the studio had to offer. On January 16, 1942, Carole Lombard boarded a TWA flight in Indianapolis after a war bonds tour, heading home to Los Angeles. The plane struck a mountain in Nevada. There were no survivors. She was 33 years old. Gable was 41. He had been in Hollywood for over a decade. He was the king of Hollywood. He had more money than he could spend and more fame than anyone needed, and the ranch he had built with the woman he had loved, which was now a place where she was not. He enlisted in the Army Air Forces within months of her death. He requested combat duty. He was assigned to the 351st Bombardment Group in England and flew 5 combat missions over occupied Europe, B-17 bombing runs over Germany, at a time when the life expectancy of bomber crews was not something the Air Force advertised, because advertising it would have made recruitment impossible. He was 41 years old. He was the most famous actor in the world. He was also genuinely in danger. The missions were not symbolic, the flak was not decorative, and at least one aircraft he flew in returned to base with damage that made it clear the danger was real. Hitler, by some accounts, offered a reward for his capture. Gable completed his missions and returned to Hollywood, having demonstrated something that the King of Hollywood title had never quite required of him before: courage of the non-cinematic variety, the kind that exists without cameras.
He came back to the films because there was nothing else to come back to. The ranch without Lombard, the studio without the sense of purpose that she had given to the parts of his life that the studio could not reach. He worked. He married 3 more times, each marriage an attempt to reconstruct something that could not be reconstructed, because what he had had with Lombard was not a formula that could be repeated with different ingredients. He drank more than was good for him. He drove fast cars and flew small planes with an appetite for speed that his friends understood as a form of grief management, and that he never fully acknowledged as such. He was not a man who talked about what was inside him. He had grown up in a world where that kind of talk was not considered useful, and the years in Hollywood had not changed the fundamental shape of the man the oil fields had made. But he worked, and the work was sometimes very good. Mogambo in 1953, in which he held his own opposite Ava Gardner and Grace Kelly, which is not a thing that all actors managed. Teacher's Pet in 1958, Run Silent, Run Deep. And then, at the very end, The Misfits, John Huston's film written by Arthur Miller, starring Gable and Marilyn Monroe, shot in the Nevada desert in brutal heat, with a script that seemed designed to extract the last real thing from everyone involved. He performed his own stunts in The Misfits, as he always had. He was 59 years old, and the physical demands of the film, roping horses in the desert heat, were significant, and his heart was not what it had been. He completed the film. He saw the rough cut. He was satisfied with what he had done, which was the standard he had always applied. He died on November 16, 1960, of a heart attack, 10 days after filming Wrapped. He never saw the finished film. His son, John Clark Gable, was born 4 months after his death. The child he had always wanted arrived too late for him to hold. He had been the king of Hollywood for 20 years,
and he had worn the title with the wry awareness of a man who understood what titles were worth. He had loved one woman completely and lost her, and carried the loss without complaint for the rest of his life. He had flown combat missions over Germany at an age when most men in his position would have found reasons not to. He had worked steadily and seriously through grief and loss and the long, slow diminishment of an era that was ending around him. The ears, the grin, the charm, all of it real, all of it earned, all of it belonging to a man from Cadiz, Ohio, who had taken the long road to the top of the world and never forgotten where the road had started. He was the king, and he earned it the hard way every single day.